And you want to know what the discourse was like. Listen to this. Here's what a talk show host in Cleveland told his listeners was at stake. He told them, if you believe in God, creation, and true science, vote for Debbie. If you believe in evolution, abortion, and sin, vote for her opponent. And you might wonder, with lingo like that, how did poor Mr. Sawyer stand a chance with stuff like that in the radio? Well, it turns out that I assume the host underestimated the strength of the sin vote. And the reason for that is that pro-evolution candidates swept the school board elections in Ohio very much as they did here in Kansas. And what I really like to talk about this to my colleagues in the scientific community, because often they get depressed and they say, Americans don't understand science, American voters don't understand scientific issues. Sure they do. All that we have to do in the science and education community is climb down from the ivory tower, get out of the classroom, get out of the laboratory, and make the case for science in plain language that people can understand, and I think Americans will go for science every single time. And these two elections in Kansas and Ohio are good indicators of that. Now, I mentioned that there were two trials in 04 and 06. The most spectacular of these was in federal court in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. A small town, Dover, Pennsylvania, had voted for an intelligent design curriculum in their schools. And 11 parents thought that this was primarily a religious idea, that the First Amendment protected them against the schools indoctrinating their students with religion, and therefore they sued the school board. The trial that ensued lasted for 7.5 weeks. It was amazing. It was covered with great publicity. And in fact, prior to the trial, the pro-intelligent design side said, this is going to be great. We have a conservative judge who drew the case, a guy named John Jones, who's a lifelong Republican, was recommended for the bench by former Senator Rick Santorum, perhaps the most conservative member of the Senate, and was appointed to the bench by George W. Bush, so we're going to get that. We got the school board on our side, and what we're going to do is we're going to get Darwinists on the stand, and we're going to break them down under cross-examination and get them to admit that evolution is just a lie. And what you see here is a representative Darwinist, namely me, on the stand being cross-examined, and that's the NBC TV courtroom sketch on the first day of the trial. And I didn't even know this was on the air until about 11 o'clock at night. I'm getting ready to go to bed. My mother calls me up and says, Kenny, you're on TV. And I switched it on, and there it was. And I said, thanks for showing me that, Mom. And then she said, have you really lost that much hair? I said, yeah. Who gave me those genes, Mom? I mean, come on. Well, what happened was not at all what the intelligent design people thought. In front of this conservative judge, intelligent design simply collapsed as anything resembling a scientific theory. Now, if you don't know about the case, it's very easy to learn all about this. Nova did a marvelous 2-hour documentary on it, which won numerous awards for broadcast journalism. They aired it a couple of years ago. They called the program Judgment Day, Science on Trial. And this is just an amazing show. It really had just about everything. It featured, of course, the judge, the school kids from Dover, hotshot attorneys on both sides, loudmouth biologists. It had the church, it had the state, it had things like burning evolution murals. And again, the name of the program was Judgment Day. And if you'd like to watch it now, just Google it. All you got to do is type Judgment Day. It's available streaming video online for free. A couple of you have watched it and were talking with me about it while we were eating, and they said it was absolutely marvelous. If you do Google it, though, I do have to warn you, though, be careful. This is the Judgment Day without Arnold Schwarzenegger. Okay? There's 2 movies of the same name. Be sure you get the right one. You might think this battle is even more epic than you thought. And there was so much publicity associated. I got to tell you one other thing. When both attorneys made closing arguments, we had seen the case for intelligent design just collapse, and everybody knew which way it was going. But the attorney for the school board, before he made his closing arguments, he opened his daybook and fumbled with it, and he looked up at the judge, and this is when we really knew what was going to happen. He looked up at the judge and said, Your Honor, I don't know if you realize this, but this trial has gone on for 40 days and 40 nights. The judge leaned forward from the bench and said, but it wasn't by design. And I think we had a pretty good idea at that point what was actually going to happen. But there was so much publicity associated with the trial that all of us who were expert witnesses on our side got interview requests. I was on Science Friday. Two of the other witnesses were on the Today program, a couple on CNN. But they all agreed I had the most interesting interview. I got interviewed on one of those, those educational cable channels that intellectuals watch all the time. There I am on that channel, and my interviewer is right over here. And yes, it's absolutely true. I wound up on the Colbert Report, and I resisted the temptation, and it was considerable. I resisted the temptation to bring a tape of the Colbert Report interview tonight. But if any of you want to see it, just Google my name on the Colbert Report. And I've actually been on there twice now and had an absolutely marvelous time with Stephen Colbert. You really have to go on there with a sense of humor, and if you do, you'll have a blast. And I did. Now, this is, as I say, I'm not giving the full lecture tonight. I'm giving some brief remarks. One of the things that struck me, and I did talk about this at Johnson County Community College, is that opposition to evolution shares a lot of common features with many people who say that global warming is a hoax or is rigged up by scientists. And I want to tell you what some of those common features are. The first thing is they share a conspiratorial view of science, which is that scientists actually get together in some kind of big secret conspiracy and try to suppress the truth. Anybody who knows science thinks, in science, people are too contentious to have a conspiracy, but nonetheless, they do seem to think that. They also generally reject the scientific process. To me, one of the beauties of science, we make mistakes all the time, but science is a self-correcting process. One of the ways in which a young person can make their career is by showing that some big shot's idea is wrong. And as long as that stays that way, science is going to be self-correcting, and it truly is. And then finally, both groups actually have an a priori conclusion. They know ahead of time that the scientific consensus must be wrong because they simply cannot abide with evolution, or they don't like the implications of public policy that might result from global warming. So these are all concerns. One of the other things I wanted to mention briefly, and we can talk about this if you want, with respect to evolution, there is no question that an awful lot of the opposition to evolution comes from religious points of view. And many people think that certain scientific fields, including evolution, are inherently opposed to religious faith. Now, there are a lot of ways to answer that. But one way to answer that might be to take a single example of a person, and whether you like this person or not, no one would say that he was not serious about religion. And the person I want to take is Pope Benedict. And Benedict was asked about 3 years ago by a group of Italian journalists whether or not evolution could be accepted by the church and by Catholics. And he actually said that the idea of a conflict between creation and evolution is an absurdity. Now, here are his exact words. The contrast between these two is absurd because there are many scientific tests in favor of evolution, which appears as a reality that we must see and enriches our understanding of life and being. Now, that's kind of complicated bureaucratic language, which is how popes always talk. So if you want to sort that out, if it's too complicated for you, do what I do always when confronted with complicated language. I go to the New York Post. They always sort it out for me. So here's how the New York Post reported the same story. I love these guys. Evolution and God do mix, Pope. So